A warning now to our viewers. We are about to show you video of today's killing on the streets of Minneapolis, and it is graphic. Several agents surround the 37-year-old man who is on the ground, apparently trying to get him under control. Officials say he was armed with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and violently resisted being disarmed.
Doing too much, man, and they keep pushing people, you know?
What happened on the streets of Minneapolis did not occur in isolation. It unfolded against a backdrop of prolonged political tension, public demonstrations, and deep disagreements over federal authority and local governance. The warning issued to viewers before the footage aired made one thing immediately clear. This was not a routine law enforcement encounter, but a deadly and consequential moment with national implications. According to officials, federal agents were attempting to control a situation involving a 37-year-old man during ongoing protest activity. Authorities state that the man was armed with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and resisted efforts to disarm him. Video from the scene shows multiple agents surrounding the individual as they attempted to restrain him. Moments later, the encounter ended in a fatal shooting. From the federal law enforcement perspective, the presence of a firearm fundamentally altered the dynamics of the situation. An armed individual, particularly in a crowded and emotionally charged environment, such as a protest, is viewed as a high-risk threat. Officials argue that hesitation in such circumstances can endanger officers, bystanders, and other protesters alike. The shooting immediately ignited controversy, not only because of the loss of life, but because of where and when it occurred. Minneapolis has remained a focal point for protest movements in recent years, especially those involving policing and federal enforcement. Any use of force in this city carries added weight, shaped by history, public memory, and unresolved mistrust. City leaders were quick to respond, emphasizing that protests earlier in the day had been peaceful. Statements highlighted the absence of property damage or injuries among demonstrators and framed the gatherings as an expression of democratic rights. At the same time, criticism was directed toward the presence of federal agents, described as masked, militarized, and unidentified, operating on city streets. This difference in framing lies at the heart of the controversy. For local officials, the focus is on protest rights, public trust, and the fear that aggressive federal tactics escalate tensions rather than calm them. For federal authorities, the focus is on enforcing laws passed by Congress and responding to what they describe as direct threats to officer safety. The disagreement raises a fundamental question. Who has the final authority in moments like this? Federal agencies maintain that immigration enforcement is a federal responsibility that cannot be overridden by state or city officials. They argue that allowing local governments to block or interfere with enforcement undermines the rule of law itself. State leadership, however, has asserted that Minnesota has both the capacity and the responsibility to manage public safety and investigations within its borders. Calls for a state-led investigation were presented as a means of ensuring accountability and transparency, particularly given the public distrust surrounding federal enforcement actions. This clash of authority is not new, but incidents involving deadly force bring it sharply into focus. Each side accuses the other of acting in bad faith. Federal officials warn that inflammatory political rhetoric paints agents as aggressors and encourages confrontations. State and city leaders counter that aggressive enforcement tactics create fear and provoke unrest. The public response has been deeply divided. Some see the shooting as a tragic but unavoidable outcome of an armed confrontation. From this viewpoint, the key issue is the presence of a firearm and resistance to law enforcement. Others view the incident as evidence of excessive force and federal overreach, particularly in a city already scarred by past police violence. Protests following the shooting reflect these divisions. Supporters of federal enforcement argue that agents were placed in an impossible position and acted to protect lives. Critics argue that the broader context, protests, political tensions, and historical mistrust makes the use of lethal force especially troubling. The debate extends beyond Minneapolis. It touches on national questions about immigration policy, federalism, and the limits of executive power. Federal agents insist they are obligated to enforce the law as written, regardless of political opposition. State and local leaders argue that enforcement strategies must account for community impact and public trust. Another layer of controversy involves the organization of protests themselves. Claims have been made that demonstrations were not spontaneous but coordinated, pointing to similar signage and recurring patterns seen in past protests against immigration enforcement. Supporters of this view argue that political organization, not organic outrage, is driving the confrontations. Others counter that coordination does not negate legitimacy. Peaceful protest, even when organized, remains a protected democratic activity. The real issue, they argue, is whether law enforcement responses are proportionate and transparent. Federal agencies have also warned about the consequences of public messaging. They argue that portraying officers as illegitimate or unlawful actors increases the risk of violence. In their view, words spoken by political leaders and media figures can translate directly into actions on the street. Historical memory plays a powerful role in shaping reactions. Minneapolis is still associated with past unrest, including riots and clashes that caused widespread damage and loss of trust. Every new incident is interpreted through that lens, amplifying fear, anger, and suspicion. The shooting has therefore become more than a single event. It is a symbol for some of the dangers faced by law enforcement officers, for others of the dangers posed by unchecked authority. Each interpretation draws on selective facts, personal values, and political identity. What remains undisputed is that a man lost his life and that the incident has intensified an already volatile debate. Investigations, whether federal or state-led, will seek to determine whether procedures were followed and whether the use of force was justified under the law. Yet even as official reviews move forward, public judgment has already been rendered in sharply opposing ways. Trust, once broken, is difficult to restore, and when incidents like this occur amid protests and political conflict, the path toward consensus becomes even more elusive. Ultimately, the events in Minneapolis illustrate how quickly law enforcement actions can become flashpoints in a divided society. One confrontation, captured on video, now stands at the center of a national argument over law, authority, protest, and public safety. As the debate continues, the questions remain unresolved. Was the shooting an unavoidable response to an armed threat? Or was it the result of broader failures in policy, communication, and trust? The answers will depend not only on investigations, but on how the nation chooses to interpret power, responsibility, and justice in moments of crisis.